I'm incredibly grateful that Senator Palumbo is sponsoring this new bill called Karilyn's Law in the New York State Legislature to safeguard New York State's most vulnerable individuals and to prevent them from ever having to go through what my mother has experienced over the last 4 years. Sadly, guardianship abuse has existed in this country for half a century, and the cruelties that caregivers inflict on their wards is incomprehensible, and sadly, it's evolved into a real-life, modern-day tragedy. So what's heartbreaking about my mother's story is she was kept in a jail-like atmosphere by 3 individuals who were appointed by the very judge to protect her interests, but instead were engaging in abuse by keeping her locked up and isolated. This jail-like isolation occurred at 2 separate assisted living facilities where my mother was denied complete access to the outside world, no communication, no contact. She was not allowed to leave her assisted living facility while every other resident at that facility could leave. She was not allowed on her balcony. It was nailed down and shut. Virtually all of my mother's personal belongings and property were confiscated from her. Her telephone, her clothing, her jewelry, her photographs, her shoes, her dishes. She was not allowed to receive letters, packages, or food delivery. And she was blocked complete access for her entire family, friends, and only grandchild without ever having an evidentiary hearing, without due process, without being given notices of any hearings that were being held. And she spent all of her time in complete isolation, all of her holidays alone, her birthday alone. And so while under the care and supervision of 3 court-appointed individuals who were entrusted to oversee my mom's medical care, my mother suffered from 4 over-medication issues. Never before has my mother ever suffered from over-medication issues, not even when she was in charge of her own care. So what's completely outrageous is my mother was paying these individuals thousands of dollars every month for the sole purpose of overseeing her care, and she's suffering from disabling symptoms caused from over-medication issues. So this is what my mother looked like before she was isolated. Before she was isolated, and this is what my mother looked like in the blue after 4 months of isolation. She dropped 3 clothing sizes, and she looked like she had aged years. So after my attorney, Ronald Denman, filed numerous petitions citing violations to Florida statutes and my mother's due process rights, suddenly the court removed all restrictions and actually disposed of my mother's guardianship case. And she was reunited. It was a joyous moment. My mother was reunited with her entire family, friends, and only grandchild. She was embarking on her newfound freedom. She moved to a facility an hour away, and she was seen by a independent forensic psychiatrist and was given a capacity evaluation where she received full capacity. Not only was she given capacity by this individual, she was seen by doctors, nurses, law enforcement agents, and adult protective services who also evaluated her and gave her capacity. The only one who's not giving her capacity is the court-appointed doctor. So at this new facility, she went out to lunch, she engaged in daily activities, she saw her family several times a week, and was really just enjoying her freedom like any elder should do in their golden years. When suddenly, this process started all over again only a few months later, and the person overseeing her care once again attempted to block her and isolate her. Sadly, my mother sustained a fall and broke her hip and was hospitalized, and she was receiving intensive rehab 7 days a week, several times a day. When this person, once again in charge of her care, moved her to a facility that wasn't equipped to offer that kind of care for my mother in that condition, and once again, she deteriorated. And she's still attempting, the person in charge of my mother's care is still attempting to isolate and block her, moving her from one undisclosed location to a next, and giving directives to facilities and law enforcement not to tell family and friends where she is. So after my mother was, all the restrictions removed, this is what she looked like. And then this is what she looks like today after she's placed back in the same kind of environment. So clearly you can see the difference of what's happening to my mother. So after litigating for my mother in court, I was contacted with numerous others, some of whom are standing here today with me, who share strikingly similar horror stories across the nation. After doing substantial research and speaking to advocates, law enforcement, nurses, doctors in the elder care system, I realized that this conduct was common practice. And no one is immune from guardianship abuse, no matter how prominent or celebrated the individual. As we clearly see in the case of Britney Spears, Amanda Bynes, Casey Kasem, Nichelle Nichols, and most recently in the case of Wendy Williams, right here, right now in the state of New York. So today, I'm not only seeking to free my mother from this horrific abuse and injustices that she's enduring, but I'm seeking to help others in the state of New York with Senator Palumbo's help and Assemblymember Thiel to sponsor this new bill and act it into law to protect vulnerable individuals and prevent them from ever having to go through this horrific ordeal. And I'm hoping that if this law is enacted, it will free Wendy Williams from her horrific ordeal. So I'm incredibly grateful for Senator Palumbo and for Assemblymember Thiel for stepping up, taking the lead, setting the precedents to reform guardianship for the rest of the nation. So I thank you for coming here today. Thank you very much for hearing my mother's story. On behalf of my mother, Karilyn, my attorney, Ronald Denman, myself, my son, Joseph, all of my family members and friends who are fighting for years to free my mother, again, I can't thank these two, Senator Palumbo and Assemblymember Thiel, for really sponsoring this bill, setting a precedent. Let's get every state to adopt this bill that will be enacted into law to reform guardianship. Thank you.